Okay, we are live. Welcome to our weekly basic income discussion group. I'm Alex Howlett. I host these things. And tonight we're talking about the Finland basic income experiment that ran from 2017 to 2018. So it was 2 years, 2 full years. And some of the results have started to trickle in at the beginning of this year. We'll probably hear more later. But tonight we want to talk about every aspect of this experiment that we think is interesting. So I guess the question I want to start with, it's just me and Nick here so far, but we've got a lot of people on the live stream, so feel free to chime in on the live stream. So the question I want to start with is, what do we think we can learn from an experiment like this?
I mean, I think it's pretty limited because it's not, it's a very small sample of people distributed all across Finland, I think. I don't think they're one town.
Right.
And so it really only, I think, can test sort of the very initial effects on one side of the equation, which is people's individual choices,
Yeah.
outlook, options. I think, so it leaves out, I think, what a lot of people hope would be the most important effects of this, which would be and it's only very short term.
Right.
So I think it's at best going to have very limited impact compared to the potential benefits of what will really be universal.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. The effects of basic income are kind of effects on the whole economy. So it's hard to, you're not going to see any of those kind of macroeconomic effects if you're just giving it to a small subset of people. If you give people money, they're basically going to be better off. Like if there's just some random person and that person now has more money, that person's going to be better off. I don't think there's any kind of controversy there. There's a little bit, like my mom pointed out, we can learn how many people quit jobs.
Well, this experiment was for only people who, there's a bunch of people who started selecting because they didn't have a job.
Yeah, that's a good point. But they did look at how many people went and got jobs compared to the people who were receiving the normal unemployment benefits.
Right.
So that brings up a question, like, does it matter? Like, why do we care whether people have jobs? Does it matter for the rest of the economy? Do we care about it for their own personal well-being? That kind of thing. So we read an article from Reuters called "Finland's Basic Income Trial Boosts Happiness but Not Employment." So clearly they were looking at employment as a factor. And I know for people who have been here before, the question is, why does employment matter, or is it important that people have jobs? And I don't know that the answer is yes. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the answer is that the only reason you'd want people working is if there's work that you need them to do, and you wouldn't necessarily want people to have jobs just for the sake of having jobs. So if you're creating jobs for the purpose of providing people jobs, that's kind of a different thing than creating jobs because we need labor somewhere or something like that. Yeah.
I mean, I do think that there's I don't share it or necessarily agree with it, but I think that there's a legitimate concern that vast numbers of people would quit their job.
Sure.
And that would decrease the productive capacity of the economy. Right? And you'd have to pay them a lot more, and like to a degree that would cause big dislocations in the economy.
And I think that's a good point. And I think that kind of depends on the size of the basic income. Like, of course, there's such a thing as a basic income that's too high. And then what do you see happen when it's too high? And then there's such a thing as a basic income that's too low, maybe. And then maybe you don't see enough of the positive effect. But I think if we have too many people working in our economy, then you probably want to set the basic income at a level that that makes it so that the right number of people are working. So you'd want, I when I imagine a basic income, I'm like, okay, well, ideally, a certain number of people will quit their jobs. There'll be fewer people working, but it needs to be the right number of fewer because you can't have nobody working. So that'll depend on the level of the basic income. So we've got a couple comments on the live stream. So the first one is from David, and he says, people need purpose, though. And I think that's right. People do need purpose. And we tend to expect three different things from the labor market. We tend to expect the efficient allocation of labor, and then incomes for consumers. Consumers get their incomes through jobs. And then we also expect this kind of purpose and meaning for workers. So the question is, to what extent do we want to sacrifice the first thing, efficiency of labor allocation, for the purpose of boosting the other two things? So the second thing, income distribution to consumers. So in order to solve that, we can have a basic income that, whatever the optimal amount of labor is in the economy or whatever the optimal wages are in the economy, that doesn't necessarily correspond to consumer incomes. So we can have a basic income that brings us the rest of the way. Hey, Richard. So that gets us up to, if you have a high enough basic income, that allows consumers to activate the full productive capacity of the economy. So we don't necessarily need the labor market to provide incomes for people if we have a high enough basic income. Now, in terms of meaning and purpose, the question is, how do you provide people meaning and purpose? If we already have a way through basic income to provide everyone with enough incomes, then is the way to provide meaning and purpose to people, is it to make up work for people to do and force them to do it? And I don't think that's the right answer for most people. It could be the right answer for some people that you kind of like need to impose this external structure on them. But I think we would want to look at a case-by-case basis for specific people who need that specific kind of support. I don't think taking away people's money and saying, oh, you have to go work at this job that we created for you for the specific purpose of giving you money. I don't think that's the way to provide people with meaning and purpose. And I think most of the types of jobs that we have in today's society, like I think a lot of the people I talk to and a lot of the people in my circles and stuff, they really like their jobs. They're very passionate about it. It does give them meaning and purpose. But there are, I think, vastly more people out there who are kind of miserable at their jobs. And if they have any kind of sense of pride or anything from their job, it comes from, look at this hard thing that I've forced myself to do. And, I've provided for my family and, made myself miserable and worked through the daily grind and stuff like that. I don't think that's the optimal kind of meaning and purpose that we want to provide for people. So the next comment on here was, so my mom said, how could it be too high? So I mean,
it could be too high if it causes inflation because there's too much. There's not enough things to buy, and so there's an
right.
So it increases the amount you have to pay for it.
Yeah. So I mean, if you have too much money chasing too few goods, then prices are going to increase. So there's kind of this capacity of the economy to produce a certain amount of stuff for people, and you want people to get the maximum benefit from the economy, but there's no point in trying to push beyond that level because the economy simply can't produce more than it can produce, whatever the limit is. If you try to push past that, if you raise the basic income higher than that, you might see, like what Nick was talking about, too many people would quit working, and then less stuff would be produced. And then also, just even if they didn't quit their jobs, you'd see too much money chasing too few goods. So what you would end up see happening is that you'd have a period of inflation where prices keep going up until it brought consumer purchasing power back down to the level that the economy can sustain. So in the end, you'd have kind of the maximum possible basic income anyway, but it would be at a different price level. And to prevent the kind of maximum disruption or to prevent any kind of disruption and dislocation in the economy, to do it as smoothly as possible, the trick is finding the level of basic income that corresponds to the prices that we have today, the price level that we have today. So that's kind of like what we would want, ideally.
I think on the subject of like people needing purpose, I mean, I think one of the hopes I have for what would happen if there was universal basic income is that there would be more people with time to kind of develop other avenues of feeling of purpose. besides.
For example, that woman in the article who created her own coffee shop with 3 other people or 2 other people. She wasn't able to do anything like that because she feared her benefits being taken away until she had the confidence of a secure income.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. I think, if you are forcing people to work, then you're forcing people to do a specific thing with their time. And if you're saying, if you do something interesting and cool, but we'll punish you for it, i.e. take away your benefits, that kind of limits people's freedom. So you can limit people's freedom. I mean, it's both limiting people's freedom, forcing people to work and then forcing people to not do anything interesting if they're not working. And when people have more freedom, that provides more, that can help provide more meaning and purpose, or at least give the possibility of people finding more meaning and purpose. But it also potentially gives them the opportunity to do something that's actually going to be useful to society. Like if we don't need that labor, if we don't need them to be working in those jobs, then you can give them the freedom to actually do something useful instead of forcing them to spend their time in a way that's not useful.
In the Canadian basic income, the disability benefits were increased by, I believe, $700 a month.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe it could be in effect, but people might want to pare it back because they don't want it to seem unfair or something, even though they have no other means to acquire income.
Yeah, and I mean, on the live chat, they're talking about how basic income should be fair to the disabled, and I think one thing that basic income isn't is it isn't something that's kind of tailored to individual people's specific situations. So basic income provides everyone with kind of a flat benefit. And then on top of that, different people are going to need different things. And that might include support for, disabilities that they might have or anything, Basic income is not, I like to say that there are problems that basic income doesn't solve. But basic income does solve the problem of how to get money to consumers and how to fund consumer spending in the markets. So the markets aren't going to function properly if consumers don't have money to spend. The economy won't produce what people don't have the money to buy. So basic income is an important part of what's necessary for a well-functioning economy, but it's not the whole thing. Yeah. So let's see what else is on here. Yeah. So one of the questions is what happens to other social support programs in the presence of a basic income. So
there are a bunch of different plans, but like the libertarian/conservative plan, they want to eliminate Social Security and things altogether, and have people buy into 401ks and things like that.
Yeah, so that's a little weird. I think what's more realistic is to say, okay, we're going to implement this basic income, and then you can kind of look and see, okay, maybe there are certain programs that don't really make sense anymore. Like, do food stamps make sense when everyone has cash and that kind of thing? But then there are some programs that are definitely still going to make sense, even if everyone has a basic income. So, for example, healthcare. Because of the way incentives work in healthcare, both with the patients and with the doctors and providers and everything, it gets to be really, really inefficient if you don't have kind of a single payer paying for the health insurance or paying for the healthcare. Because then, different health insurance companies are going to try to exclude people to maximize their profits, and then you get this whole weird kind of perverse incentive competition thing that drives up prices and creates a lot of uncertainty in how people receive their healthcare. So I think even if you have a basic income, you're still going to want, not that we even have it today in America, but you're still going to want healthcare that's largely managed by the government, or the payment for it being largely managed by the government. That makes sense. Yeah. But food stamps, and unemployment insurance is certainly one that once we have the basic income in place, we might realize, well, why are we why are we compensating people for not having jobs? Like if the expectation in our society is not that you have a job and that's how you earn your income, then we don't need to compensate people for not having that. I think that's not necessary anymore. So
and farm subsidies probably would go away as well.
Yeah, farm subsidies, anything that kind of subsidizes an industry or something like that. If there's not enough of something being produced for whatever reason and the consumer demand isn't naturally activating that production, then you might have a reason to pay for it directly as the government. So there are certain services like, I don't know, like military and infrastructure and stuff like that, where consumers aren't going to be like, oh, I'm going to buy a road or something like that. So that needs to be managed in kind of a more centralized way.
I was thinking a few days ago about how if people had a basic income, they might not enlist in the military anymore, because that's one of the main people not being able to find a job is one of the reasons why they go into the military, so they actually have a job.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the military is a big part of it is that it's kind of this giant jobs program. Not just the soldiers, but the military contractors and all of that. And a lot of the arguments for why we shouldn't reduce or cut some of these programs, not just military, but other government programs, is all the jobs that would be destroyed.
Like we were talking about last week, how the military says we don't want any more tanks, but the congressmen shove the tanks down their throats. So we want more jobs in our district. Yeah.
The whole jobs thing is kind of one of our core values in America, like this belief in work ethic and that kind of stuff. So let's see. There's a few more comments on the live stream here. So Jacqueline says, UBI is not enough for those who've been pushed out of if a UBI is not enough for those who've been pushed out of the economy, for whatever reason, age discrimination, physical limitations, health and disabilities, to live in dignity, then it's not a basic income. So, I mean, it depends on what your definition of basic income is. The definition that we use here is that it's an amount of money that goes to everyone unconditionally. So that could be any amount. It could be like 1 cent a year or something like that. So the question is, what is the optimal amount? And I would argue that there's no reason why we should have a basic income that's any less than what we can afford. And I think the amount we can afford is well above, Jacqueline, well above a level that you would be happy with. There's absolutely no reason to arbitrarily cap it at like the poverty level or something like that if we can afford more.
I saw a video about Kuwait and how they receive fund their sort of like a basic income type of thing through oil revenues.
Yeah.
So just like Alaska. So and there are some people that are so wealthy they never have to work or anything like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting in Kuwait because it's something like only 33% of their population are actually citizens, and they're the only ones who get this benefit. So that's another tricky thing with basic income. If it only goes to citizens, what kind of problems does that create for non-citizens and stuff like that in your economy? So let's see. Here's a comment from David. He says, the only way I see such things as UBI and minimum wages actually working would be price controls, which causes its own problems with businesses' reason to continue to produce their goods and services. So that's an interesting comment. Let's see if he says any more about that. I don't know, David, feel free to chime in about the price controls thing, but I'll respond that I don't think, I'm confident that a basic income does not require price controls. So the idea is that there's a certain level of consumer spending that the economy can productively respond to. And then the question is, how do you get spending money into the hands of consumers? How do you make sure they can buy stuff? So historically, we've done a combination of things. We've used economic policy to kind of distort the labor market and create unnecessary jobs and then force money into consumers' hands that way. And we've also used things like minimum wage, which I would say is also a distortion to the labor market. You are forcing wages to be higher than what the amount would be necessary just to get the person to do the work. So those add inefficiencies into the labor market. And now basic income is an alternative. Instead of saying, okay, we're going to like tweak this part of the market, we're going to say, okay, well, this is, consumers have this kind of baseline spending level that they're able to spend, and then we can let the markets be efficient. So if you have a basic income and everyone's able to produce everyone's able to buy what the economy is capable of producing for them at kind of the maximum level, then there's no reason to say, oh, we need to create jobs for people. We need to use economic policy to create jobs. And then the other thing we do, and this is kind of related, is through monetary policy, when we lower interest rates, we increase the ability for people to borrow. So if we're worried about prices going down or consumer spending not being high enough, what the Fed does is they say they have a mechanism for how they do this, which is that they actually buy treasury securities from the banks and stuff like that to lower the interest rates. But then that makes it easier for people to borrow money because the interest rates are now lower. And that can fund a lot of consumer spending. And then that also goes to jobs too, because a lot of jobs are created through businesses being able to borrow more because the interest rates are lower. So I don't know.
And that creates a lot of BS jobs because the industries don't need to exist because
right.
They're able to borrow money to fund these industry.
Yeah, so we have a long history of kind of creating unnecessary work for people to do as a way of giving them money. And David Graeber talks about bullshit jobs, and his idea of what's a useless job is slightly different from mine. His is like things that feel useless, that the workers know that it doesn't mean it's not actually contributing anything and stuff like that. And I would say that that's probably true, that a lot of those jobs don't need to exist. But then there are other types of jobs where it might feel really meaningful and useful to both the employer and the employee, but it's a job that might not exist in an efficient labor market if we had a basic income. So I don't think you don't need to have price controls in place in order to have a basic income. What you do need to have is you need to have robust monetary policy. So if the basic income is causing any kind of inflationary pressure, you need the central bank to come in and raise interest rates and reduce the amount of spending that's funded by borrowing in the economy. And a nice side effect of this is that when there's less credit in the economy, it reduces the chance that you're going to have these credit bubbles and crashes like we saw in 2008. The Fed was allowing the borrowing to increase and increase and increase, partly because they wanted to sustain consumer spending. Instead of that, we could have sustained consumer spending with the basic income, and then the bubble never would have formed in the first place. So that's just, all of this is to say that the economy does have a certain kind of productive capacity, and at any level of actual production, you can have any price level. Like each price level is just a redenomination of every other price level. So the idea is at whatever our level of production is, you kind of want to keep the price level consistent with what it has been. So over the past few months, few years, et cetera, you kind of want to keep prices steady. And we can do that through monetary policy. It's not a problem. So let's see. So Jacqueline was saying, the argument that a UBI can't be high enough for people to be able to afford a comfortable life is the same as the arguments that were raised against FDR's New Deal, specifically unemployment compensation. So I think the key thing to remember here is that the ability for people to be able to afford to have a comfortable life, it depends on what the economy is capable of doing. So in order for people to have a comfortable life, you have to have ensure that people have enough money to spend to buy that comfortable life. And if we 10 years ago, we could afford to produce a comfortable life for people, we had the goods and services to ensure that people had a comfortable life, there's no reason why we can't do that today. It's not like we've lost productive capacity or something like that. So the idea that the basic income wouldn't be high enough to provide a comfortable life for people, I mean, you might have a particular... Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, Keynes in the 1930s said we're going to have produce enough stuff to people by people only working 15 hours, but then that was holding true into the 1970s when we suddenly started creating all these BS jobs and things like that, and all these extra goods, and now people just work 60 hours a week and they're just not making that much, so they have to keep working more and more and more. But if we had a basic income, we could cut back, and maybe we could achieve the 15 hours a week by the 19th and by the 2030s, if it's instituted by then.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we could have had less and less work being done, but instead we decided to not have a basic income and create jobs for people to do. That's something we've been doing for a long time, since well before Keynes's time, right? And in the 1930s, during when FDR came up with the Green New Deal, or not the Green New Deal, the regular New Deal, excuse me. People needed money. They didn't need jobs, and maybe there was work that needed to be done, and we used the fact that people needed jobs as an excuse to get that work done, and that's fine. But these are kinds of backwards ways of thinking about it. If we need work done, we should pay for the work, and if people need money, we should give them the money. So, yeah, I would say that the New Deal was probably could have been done better if we'd been thinking about more about basic income and stuff like that. So Jacqueline is worried that if we implement that people who want to implement a UBI want to scrap kind of all these other social benefit programs, and I think that, well, first of all, I think that most people who are talking about UBI do not want that, and second of all, I would say that if your reason for wanting a basic income is so that you can scrap all this other stuff, then I think you're thinking about basic income in the wrong way. So the question is, what do we want out of our economy? We want people to be able to get the most benefit. We want people to be able to buy stuff, and then the question is, well, how do you make that happen? And the answer is to give consumers money. So there's nothing in that thinking that has anything to do with cutting other programs or anything like that. Yeah. So let's see.
But it is true that there are people on the right who are saying we should have a basic income and cut everything else.
Yeah, there
are voices out there.
Yeah, but I would say that's not the majority of basic income supporters, and it's also, I would say that those people are fundamentally misunderstanding something about the economy. I do think that I'm an optimist, and I do think that most people care about people, and they want to live in the most prosperous society possible. They don't want, nobody's a fan of poverty. Nobody wants people to be poor, and different people just have kind of a different understanding of how the economy works. Everybody kind of sees their own part of it and has their own perspective and biases, and they're all like kind of touching a different part of the elephant, so they don't really see the full thing. Like, people in Silicon Valley might be like, oh my God, we're going to be able to automate all this stuff. How are people going to get their incomes? So that's what they think about. And then, other people might be thinking about different stuff. So yeah. So let's see.
Like the debt bubble or national debt, we have to slash all these benefits and things like that because the debt penalties will be $1 trillion a year or something like that in a few years.
Yeah. A lot of people are worried about balancing the budget, and then that comes from this idea that money. If you give someone money, it has to kind of come from somewhere else in the economy, that kind of thing. And that's a valid perspective. That's intuitive to people that's how it would work. So here's a comment by David. I know we haven't really been talking about Finland, but this is a basic income meetup, and it's a very interesting discussion. So David says, the tough thing with people's freedom to choose, there are a lot of people who will get lazy if the amount of money provided is too high. So the question is, what do we want out of people, right? If they're lazy and happy, is that a problem? If the people who are, have a predisposition to be lazier, if those are the ones who are not in our workforce, who leave the workforce, is that a bad thing? And I don't think so. I think if the lazy people are the ones who all quit, then the ones you have left working in your economy are more productive and that kind of thing.
There's a story about how do you want someone who's flipping burgers because they're forced to for $7.50 per hour and they just hate their job, or do you want someone who wants to see their person smile on their face as they're eating this gourmet burger?
Yeah, I mean, do you love providing burgers for people, and is that what brings you joy? If I had a choice, I would want that person flipping my burgers for me. I think that would be fantastic. I know we're not always going to have that, but
or you could have Flippy, who was instituted in Cali Burger in California in 50 stores, and they cost $60,000 and $12,000 a year in upgrades and things like that.
Yeah, burger flipping robot. If nobody derives so much joy from flipping burgers, then you can outsource it or you can automate it. The less kind of work that people have to do, the more freedom there is for people to spend their time more in ways they want. Or ideally, that's how it should be. That's how it could be if we ensured that everybody had spending money, but wasn't because we're protecting jobs or something like that. So I want to go back to David's comment, which is when you give people freedom to choose, sometimes they're going to choose to do things you don't like, and sometimes they're going to choose to do things that are harmful to themselves. I think this is the price of freedom, or this is part of the price of freedom. When we had slavery, the argument for a lot of the people who are anti-abolishing slavery was, well, if you give all these slaves their freedom, then what are they going to do with their time? How are they going to have purpose in their lives? That kind of thing. I think that's a reasonable question to ask. But I don't think the answer is to say no, we shouldn't give them their freedom. I think there are very specific cases where when you give people freedom, they harm other people or harm themselves or something like that. And you can deal with those cases. And certainly, when we freed the slaves, there were a lot of people who didn't know what to do with themselves. A lot of them went back to be sharecroppers for the same people who used to be their owners and that kind of thing. But I would argue that, still the answer is not to not give them their freedom. The answer is to, figure out how to help them once they have their freedom, help them get the most out of life. I mean, what we want from our society is we want people to be able to get the most out of what the world has to offer them. So yeah, I'm not worried about, and then there are some things that people might choose to do that might seem like laziness to outsiders, but those people are actually happy doing what they're doing. And is there any reason to not let them do that? If we need them to be working, we have a labor market, and everybody has a price, and if you really want people to work, you can pay them to work. If not enough people are working, then maybe you set the basic income too high. But I'm not worried about people becoming lazy, because I think that's just people are choosing to do what they do with themselves, and the more freedom people have, the more technology we have, the more we can provide for people, the more I want people to be able to take advantage of that. If that makes sense. So let's see. So David says, we shouldn't compensate people who don't want to work. That's what's wrong with welfare now. Yeah, so I think, obviously paying people not to work is a little bit weird. And that's a little bit like what we do with welfare. When you make a certain amount of money, you start to lose some of your benefits. Welfare cliffs, exactly. So that's problematic. One of the advantages of basic income is that it doesn't do that. It's a benefit that everybody gets. So it's not like you reach a certain level and then you lose that benefit. We don't punish people for working, but we also don't with a basic income. You're also not forcing people to do work that is maybe not necessary for the economy. So you find a basic income that's kind of the optimal level, and then the labor market can be efficient. And the only purpose of wages, instead of like providing for people's livelihood and stuff like that, the only purpose of wages would just be to be the amount of money that's enough to incentivize people to work. And I think that's far more efficient and less wasteful. You don't want to be wasting people's time, and you don't want to be wasting other resources. A lot of times, so this is another issue with jobs, is that people are commuting to their jobs all the time. That causes emissions. This is bad for the environment. Climate change, all of that. If we eliminate,
they get stressed out by their 2-hour commutes or whatever.
Yeah. You're wasting people's time and you're causing carbon emissions. If we eliminated half the jobs, would that be enough to eliminate rush hour? To clear up congestion on the roads. That would be a huge impact on the environment. So there's a lot of kind of externalities to forcing people to do unnecessary work.
And the whole stressed out thing is related to the whole Finland experiment, because they're more happy when they don't have to deal with the bureaucracy every month or every few weeks.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And it brings us to Finland. And Nick has to go in a few minutes. So I kind of want to start talking about Finland a little bit more. So we have this article that's actually pretty short that we read about Finland. So it's called Finland's Basic Income Trial Boosts Happiness, but Not Employment. This is by Anne Kauranen. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this is for Reuters. So I'll just start from the top. Finland's basic income scheme did not spur its unemployed recipients to work more to supplement their earnings as hoped, but it did help their well-being, researchers said on Friday as the government announced initial findings. So this isn't last Friday. The article is from February 8th, so it's from early February. But yeah, I mean, this kind of is related to what we were talking about in that they ran this experiment and they were hoping that people would work more. Is that really what we should be hoping people's response should be to a basic income? I don't think so.
Yeah, it's interesting that that's the headline in all the articles.
Yeah. But I think the reason it's the headline is because that's what they were measuring. And I think, ideally with a basic income, you would want, if you give people money, you should expect them to want to work less or to want to, spend their time doing what they want to be doing, even if it pays less. Maybe it's still a job, but it's not as high a paying a job or something like that. That's what I would expect from a basic income, and that's what I would want from a basic income. Now, the other part of the title is that it boosted happiness, and I think that's great. I mean, ultimately, what we want is, given the resources that are available to our economy, we want people to be as happy as possible. We want people to be as prosperous as possible. So that's.
And what's the use of having if you're working 60 hours a week, you can't do anything else. Like you can't go on a vacation or whatever. Like in the U.S., you don't have any paid vacation days or anything like that. So you can't enjoy your money. What's the use of $100,000 a year if you can't do anything with it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So, I mean, all this is to say is that giving people money makes them better off. We kind of knew that before running this experiment. So what's the point of the experiment? I mean, I guess they wanted to show certain things about the effects on individual people, but I don't think that's the most interesting part of basic income. It's not how individual people respond. It's how the economy responds, and you can't do that by giving it to 2,000 people who are scattered across the economy. You're not going to see any effects on stimulating production. You're not going to see any effects on markets or anything like that, or even on prices. If you're worried about prices, you're not going to see any effects that monetary policy would have to respond to keep prices stable.
You need to have it localized to see if anything happens at all, which it probably will if it's given to a high enough percentage of that city or that town.
Yeah. The issue with that is that you could give money to everybody in a city, and then maybe people in that city stop working, but they can buy things from adjacent cities, and it's kind of just a continuation of giving it to individual people. I don't know that you can really start to see the macroeconomic effects until you get to the level of a whole country or something like that, and then you'd really a large enough population that trade with other countries, like maybe an entire currency zone or something like that, So trade with other countries. If you're giving everyone a basic income that's way too high and you don't want to produce anything, then maybe the value of your currency in the international markets depreciates, and people don't want to sell you stuff internationally as much anymore. That you can see that kind of effect if your basic income is too high. But you wouldn't. I mean, like, it's hard to draw any conclusions if you're just looking at the level of an individual person, or even an individual city, or even an individual country in the Eurozone, which is relevant to Finland. Yeah, because Finland is in the Eurozone. They have the euro as their currency. So if they gave out a basic income, it's not really going to affect the value of the euro. It might affect some prices in Finland or something like that. But again, you're seeing a very, like, this isn't even what they did. They didn't give basic income to everyone in their country. But you're not going to see the overall effects that you'd want to see from a basic income.
I mean, it might be that I think most people who come to a basic income meetup are kind of into the idea.
Right.
It may be that the results of this experiment will allay some fears of people. I mean, I had somebody say to me, basic income's not going to solve it. Like, look at Indian reservations. Like, people are hopeless and miserable and alcoholics there because they're they've got everything provided for them.
They don't have everything provided for them.
It breeds dependency. No, I don't. This is what somebody said to me, right? Like, I think people fear that it will lead to people being, like, dependent on it, and kind of they'll give up on finding a career or something.
Then there's the whole Eastern Band of Cherokee who have casino revenues of $9,000 a year, and their children who were provided at a young enough age are happier, and they're more productive, and they're more likely to graduate from high school and things like that. Where before that, the older they started receiving their casino benefits, the less the effect is on their personality.
That's interesting. I'd like to learn more about that.
I guess they did that article.
Yeah, that's a good one. We might do a meetup on that one. But I think the question of dependency brings up an interesting point, because we like, in an economy where everyone's specializing, we all become interdependent on each other. Is dependency a bad thing, or does it allow us to be more efficient? Because I think if you try to be self-sufficient, if everybody kind of has to produce their own thing, that's really inefficient. That's wasteful of resources, and people are going to die, and arguably the reason the planet can even sustain a human population as large as the one we have now is because we've got some of this efficiency from specialization. So if we really tried to make everyone be self-sufficient, would the planet even have the resources to support that? So I think I think,
like, if you, like, in India, they have all these small farms that are subsistence farming, and then they go out of business. These larger farms buy them out, and they don't have to use as much fertilizer and things like that to create, like, 10 times as much food.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want everybody farming their own food, or do you want like a really efficient business kind of mass producing food that's just as good nutritionally and far more efficient in terms of resources? And I would say the latter. Why do you want to force everyone to make their own food? There's a reason why it used to be the case that everyone was a farmer, and now it's a very small percentage of people
like
are farmers.
2%.
Yeah, that's great. That sounds fantastic to me. David brought up another point where he said, in a completely automated world, UBI should be enough to pay for the basics. And if you want to further your education, health, or community, your UBI increases so that you still have incentives. And I don't know that that's the right way to think about basic income. I think so the question I have for David is, why would you want the basic income to be any less than what the economy can sustain, what we can afford? So certainly, if your basic income is higher than what the economy can afford, then you don't have enough incentives, et cetera, to produce all the stuff that people can buy with money.
Was the Swiss referendum? They said that one of the people that they said that would be like $2,600, and no one said that we can't afford this. There wasn't even any sort of discussion about that. They just said no one would want to work because it's too high or something.
Yeah, and I mean, so the question is, to what extent do we need people to further their education, health, or community, that kind of thing? And the answer to that question is, well, it depends. And there's no reason why we should withhold money from people in order to incentivize that if we're already getting enough of that from people. And if we're not getting enough of that from people, then maybe the basic income can't be as high, and that's fine. But there's no reason to say like, oh, the basic needs is where we draw the line. It's more, well, we draw the line where the incentives in the economy can be optimal for providing people the greatest benefit. So David said universal basic income, capitalizing the word basic. So sometimes when people talk about basic income, they say that the word basic in there means basic needs. And that's I think a valid definition, but it's not the only one. And when I actually started learning about basic income and talking about basic income, the word basic in there means it provides a base. It's a base level of income that everybody gets.
It's a floor instead of a net that people can fall through.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's right. So the idea isn't that what the basic income buys is basic. See you later, Nick. Thanks for coming out.
Bye, everybody.
The idea isn't that what the basic income buys is basic. It's that the income itself is basic. So what's the highest level of income that we can provide people as a base? And if we're not providing it at the highest possible level, then there's benefit in the economy that we're kind of leaving on the table. There's productive capacity that's not being activated. So I think there's, you have to ask yourself the question, why would we want people to be less prosperous than what the economy can sustain? So that's something to think about, David. But certainly the basic part of basic income does not mean that it's only for basic needs. That's not what it means. There are people who argue that, but that's kind of not the definition in the broadest sense. So let's see. Let's go back to the article, talk about Finland a little bit. The 2-year trial, which ended a month ago, saw 2,000 Finns chosen randomly from among the unemployed to become the first Europeans to be paid regularly monthly income by the state that was not reduced if they found work. So I mean, I think that's cool that they were trying that, but I don't know that I don't know what there is to learn scientifically from this. I think it can be a political thing, like maybe people actually are worried about the work thing and you show them that, oh, well, there's no difference if they're receiving a basic income or not. Oh, they actually are happier. But again, I don't think it's controversial to say that people are happier when you give them money. Yeah. So there's another issue with Finland, which is that since they are in the Eurozone, they can't just spend new money into the economy and fund a basic income that way. And this is going to be an issue for any country that's in the Eurozone, or if a state in the United States wanted to implement it on the state level or a particular city or something like that. They actually do have to have a tax in order to fund the basic income. This is not true of basic income in general. And in general, basic income is constrained by the amount of spending that the economy can sustain, the amount of consumer spending that activates the productive capacity of the economy. What's the productive capacity of the economy?
Like just a few, like a month ago or something like that.
Yeah.
Italy wants to fund the basic income.
Italy wants to fund the basic income, so they're also in the Eurozone. So the question is, what's the most efficient way to implement a basic income in kind of a deficit neutral way in your country, with respect to like what kind of taxes you're choosing and that kind of thing? Because anytime you have a tax on your economy, that kind of creates some inefficiency, or it creates some incentives not to produce, or for people to move to lower tax areas and that kind of thing. So that's a very tricky thing. Now, when you're implementing a basic income, ordinarily we just think of it as something that everybody gets. But then, if you have to have a corresponding tax, then it can start to look a lot more like a targeted program when you combine the basic income itself that everybody gets with a tax that kind of claws back money from some of those people. So then the net benefit that you gain is like, if it's a progressive tax or something like that, the net benefit to people goes to the poor and not to the rich.
And then there's this Prospera program in Mexico that they're canceling, but they can't because of the World Bank for another few years. That a lot of people who should get it don't get it, and people who shouldn't get it do get it because of the tax information is incorrect.
Right. So one of the advantages of basic income that I like is that everybody gets it, and then if you want
if it's universal, that is.
Basic income is universal. That's part of the definition.
But there's also the guaranteed income that Martin Luther King wanted.
Yeah, his was not universal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting that basic income advocates like to pull in all these kind of celebrity names like Martin Luther King, Milton Friedman, that kind of thing. It's like these people did not.
Stockton program.
Yeah.
Where people and the guy who was the Facebook founder who was funding Seed.
Chris Hughes. Yeah.
Yeah, he wants it up to $50,000.
Yeah, I mean, so that's not a basic income. It's people are kind of comparing it to basic income, and because they want to say that basic income has this broad base of support, they're like, oh, this person is for it, that person's for it, et cetera, et cetera. But really, they're not. And it's not true that Martin Luther King was for a basic income in the sense that we talk about it here. It's not true that Milton Friedman was for a basic income in the sense that we talk about here. Maybe a little bit more, but he definitely wanted to associate the basic income with an income tax. He called it a negative income tax, and that's everybody gets a basic income, but there's also an income tax that's kind of like linked to it. What were we talking about? So one of the cool things about basic income is that everybody gets it. And then, you have to get everything right on the taxation side. If you actually do have to balance it with a tax, you have to get everything right on the taxation side if you want to target it specifically to the poor. So that means if the government messes up and forgets to do something, it means they forgot to take away your money instead of forgetting to give you your money. So if you have, a specific targeted welfare program and the government makes a mistake, that might mean they forgot to give someone the money who needed the money. So the government, of course, wants to save money. So if you have a basic income in place, then the government's desire to save money is an incentive for them to get the taxation side right.
I read an article, I believe it was last month, how England paid all these extra benefits to people who shouldn't have received it, and so they over like a 7-year period or something like that, and so they want people to pay back all those benefits because they messed up. Should they have to pay them back, even though they don't have them, and because they're poor in the first place?
Yeah, that's a tough thing too. So if the government undertaxes you and they mess that up, then can they come back at you later and say, we forgot to tax you? That can be a problem for people too because they don't have the money anymore. So that's a good point, and that's a problem that basic income doesn't solve. But at least it does put the responsibility on the government to ensure that it gets things right, instead of kind of putting the responsibility on the people who need income the most are the ones who don't really have the resources to spend time fighting with procedure and working through the various forms and regulations.
And they might be mentally disabled or something like that, and not be able to advocate for themselves, or they need someone else. And if there's like the poverty center or something like that, and there's 100,000 people, and there's only 10 people or 100 people who have to go through all those people, how are they going to be helped in the time? You have a deadline in 6 months, and how are you going to 100,000 people?
Yeah. So yeah, so Jacqueline says, I'm not in favor of any Trojan horse that merely serves the interest of those who have everything, largely due to ensuring that many of us never got to have anything. So I think I think obviously you don't want a program in place that's going to keep poor people poor. We would want everyone to kind of be as prosperous as possible. Like I was saying, nobody's in favor of poverty, and I think even rich people are not in favor of other people being poor. They just don't necessarily understand how to end poverty. They don't necessarily understand how to ensure that people get the maximum benefit from the economy.
They want all these benefits, but if you don't give people enough to create the next generation of workers, then they're not going to have these things in the future.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even if you're a rich person, you don't want to walk down the street and have a bunch of poor people around you. You don't want to live in a society where, a lot of people are sick or desperate. There's more crime when people are poor, that kind of thing.
Or potholes where you want to drive your Rolls Royce or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think no matter what level of wealth you have, you want to live in a prosperous, well-functioning society. So the idea that basic income is kind of a Trojan horse so let's see, merely serves the interests of those who already have everything. Well, I think it serves the interests of those who already have everything, but it also serves the interests of those who have nothing. It serves the interests of anyone who's poor or anything like that. And one of the things I like to say about basic income is that it aligns the incentives of big businesses with the welfare of ordinary people, of the consumers. Because if you give people money to spend, if you give consumers money to spend, now the way to profit if you're a business is to produce things that consumers want, to produce things that make consumers' lives better. And if there's a basic income, then everyone's a consumer. Even the poorest people, they have money to spend. So now the businesses, they want your business, so they're going to be doing things that are going to make your life better in order to get your money. You want them to get your money. Yeah.
If there isn't a basic income like there is now, and people can't afford bread, so there's not enough bread produced. So that if you have a basic income, then there's people start buying bread, and so there's more bread produced is because there's additional demand.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The economy is not going to produce what people don't have the money to buy. So if your economy is underproducing, then the answer is to give people more money. And I think it's true that most of the businesses in today's economy, they'd be happy to produce more stuff. They'd be happy to sell more stuff to consumers if there were more consumers who had money to spend to buy their product. That's more profitable for them. What you want to do is you want to make it so that it's profitable for businesses to produce more. And a basic income that's what gets us there. If your basic income is high enough, then it gets everyone kind of producing at the optimal limit of what the economy can handle. So yeah. Let's see. So David brings up an interesting point. He says, "Won't we need to restructure the education system? Seems like it doesn't keep kids interested or provide them with useful information." And then he further says, especially for the jobs of the future, or in the case of complete automation hobbies. So it's interesting when we talk about education in our society. A lot of times, what we're really talking about is job training. And if we're in a society where we're kind of forcing everyone to get a job, and if you don't have a job, you're not going to live a good life, that kind of thing, or if you're not going to have the right job, you're not going to have a good life, then it's understandable that we talk about education in this way. But
I think in the future we need to teach people how to think, not what to think.
Yeah, and I think that's right. Teaching people how to think, and also how to get the most enrichment out of the world around them, out of whatever resources are available. We can stimulate people's intellectual development. Education doesn't have to be about training people for jobs.
Like in ancient Greece, they had slaves to do their labor. A slave is like a machine, sort of. And so if people have slaves to do their labor, they're able to do things that they perceive with philosophy and things like that, or go to participate in their democracy. Direct democracy is possible when they have someone, when you don't have to work for your living. They're able to produce, to engage in their communities.
Yeah. If people have the freedom to spend their time how they want, that means the freedom to be more civically engaged. So that's a huge thing too. Did you know that the word slave originated from the, I think it's the the word robot originated from the Romanian word for slave.
It's Czechoslovakian.
Czechoslovakian? Oh, okay. All right. Richard has a lot of facts. He knows things.
Mm-hmm.
Robots are the slaves of the future, man, and everyone can be free to do interesting things if we let the robots and the technology do the boring stuff to the extent that it's possible, and I think that's going to be more possible the further we go. So kind of back to education, there's kind of the job training part of it. But even more than that, sometimes it's the credentialing. Like maybe you have a college degree and the job does not require a college degree or require you to do anything that uses what you got in the college degree. But if you go to an employer and they've got a ton of people who don't have college degrees, and then some people who do have college degrees, they'll be like, oh, well, why not hire the people who have the college degrees? I mean, it's basically a credential. So there's a huge difference in my mind between college and education. So education can be any kind of learning. It can be any kind of directed learning, anything. There's tons of educational resources online. We have the resources to provide everyone in the world with a world-class education through the internet.
And you can steer people towards vocational training instead of a college education, because not everyone's suited for a college.
Yeah, I mean, I think not everyone's suited for college, but I also think, the idea of vocational training, it's still kind of in this mold of expecting everybody to get a job and prepare people for jobs. I think if you're a business and you want to hire people, then maybe it's on you, or maybe it's on you kind of getting together with other businesses to figure out how to incentivize people to train to work at your jobs. Maybe you even pay them to do that. It's if it's profitable for you to hire people to do something, then it's and nobody wants to do it. Then maybe it's profitable for you to train them to do it yourself. It's a little bit weird that we're expecting people to kind of take it on themselves to prepare them for jobs, when really it's the businesses who need the people. So I would want businesses to pay for
state-funded state-funded colleges and things like that. And so people, like they have in many countries in Europe.
Yeah, you could have state-funded colleges, but even with colleges, only a very small percentage of people go to college. And the primary reason why people do it these days is for the credential, and the level of education you can get outside of college, potentially, if you have the freedom to do that, is way higher. It's just not going to get you the job. For most colleges, there are some colleges where it's kind of a unique intellectual experience that you can't really get anywhere else, and you're in the room with people who are thinking, at levels that you're not going to get that experience anywhere else. But for most colleges, it's not important to education for people to be able to go to college, I don't think. And we can do a lot better educating people if we kind of start to move past this college paradigm. Yeah. So let's see. So Alex says he thinks that $12,000 a year would be too low. There are proposals out there with that level, but there are many different proposals with much higher levels, as far as he knows. Yeah, and I think that's right. I think $12,000 a year is well below what the economy can sustain. At least in America, there are some countries that don't have the resources to provide people with very much basic income. And that gets into the question of, should the richer countries be providing basic incomes to the poorer countries and stuff like that, but we don't need to get into that here. So David likes your comment. We need to teach people how to think and not what to think. So let's see. Let's go back. Jacqueline brought up the name of Scott Santens. So Scott Santens is a big basic income advocate. I I don't know that he has a clear understanding of the economics of basic income. He certainly talks a lot and brings in ideas from a lot of different places. Some of them are better ideas, and some of them are ideas that don't make as much sense, and that kind of thing. And he's certainly a valuable voice in the basic income community. But there's certainly a lot of things I either disagree with him on, or that he doesn't really have a strong position on. He's just trying to like build up as much basic income hype as possible.
Like Yang.
A little bit like Andrew Yang. I think Andrew Yang's presidential candidate who's running on the basic income platform. I think he's a little bit more focused than Scott Santos is, but there are plenty of things that I disagree with Andrew Yang about too. I think his plan, his plan is one of these plans that's only $12,000 a year, and I think his plan is going to work despite the flaws that it has. It has some flaws.
Like the VAT.
Like the VAT. So the value added tax is a tax on production. And what constrains the amount of the basic income that's possible is the productive capacity on the economy. So on the one hand, you're taxing production, which reduces the productive capacity of the economy, and on the other hand, you're giving people more money to activate more productive capacity. Now, I don't think the VAT is enough to. So the VAT actually reduces the amount of basic income you can afford. I don't think it'll reduce it below $1,000 a month, though. But it's partly a consequence of him wanting it to be a revenue neutral program. And of course, the government spending doesn't have to be balanced by taxes. That's kind of mostly a political thing, and there's some economists who believe the budget should be balanced too. But if he gets to be president and he wants to institute a basic income, then it's a lot easier to make it happen politically if he does make it revenue neutral. Like if he wants to pass it through reconciliation in Congress, then and it's blowing up the deficit, then that's going to be a lot harder to do. So there's some political reasons why you'd want it to be revenue neutral, but the optimal basic income is probably not, to be honest. So let's see. So David's bringing up some fiction here. He wants the future to be a combination of the beginning of The Giver, which I haven't read, and the structure of divergent factions to meet people in the fields in which you will want to be in, with the badness of Oasis. So I haven't read any of these things, unfortunately.
I watched the Divergent and The Giver, but I don't know anything about the Oasis.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, the future, if you have if you have a basic income that activates the full productive capacity, that provides people the maximum benefit, then what the future looks like, we can only imagine. Like, I don't know, like there's so much human potential that can be unlocked when people aren't forced to work in specific jobs anymore.
Like the person who's forced to work in the next Albert Einstein, who's forced to work in the field, and they can't develop their potential because they're not able to go to college or even get an education.
Yeah,
so like kindergarten or something.
Yeah, how many Albert Einsteins and Mozarts and Leonardo da Vinci's are out there? Like, we have no idea, but it's probably a small percentage of people, but there's so many people who don't have the opportunity to realize their full potential that, there's probably a significant number of these people out there who just are not able to reach their full potential.
Like my great-grandfather, he only was able to get to 4th grade, but then someone paid for it because he passed an exam. He was able to go from 4th grade to college.
Wow, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be great if more people had that opportunity. So yeah. Let's see. Yeah. So let's go back to the article a little bit. So Finland, the world's happiest country last year, according to the United Nations, is exploring alternatives to its social security model. So this is an example, I guess, of what Jacqueline was talking about, where they're talking about an either-or type situation. And I guess it kind of makes sense in a country like Finland, where they don't control their own monetary policy, so they can't just spend new money into the economy. So there are going to be trade-offs. Either they're going to have to cut other programs, or they're going to have to raise taxes or something like that. My hunch is that a basic income in their country is going to be better than not having a basic income. But due to the constraints of being in the Eurozone, they'll have to balance it with some kind of taxes. Yeah. So here's an interesting paragraph. The trial was being watched closely by the basic income trial was being watched closely by other governments who see basic income as a way of encouraging the unemployed to take up often low-paid or temporary work without fear of losing their benefits. That could help reduce dependence on the state and cut welfare costs, especially as greater automation sees humans replaced in the workforce. So it's interesting. So I guess this relates to the effect of they didn't see employment increase when people had the basic income, and I think it's actually a good point. Like there's all kinds of jobs that are possible for people that they might not be able to afford to take because they don't pay enough, or because they would lose their benefits if they took those jobs. So basic income can certainly give people the freedom to get those kinds of jobs. And it's interesting that they didn't see that. I wonder if they would have seen more of that if they didn't have a minimum wage or something like that. Like what if someone wants to be a puppeteer for $3 a week or something, something really absurd. There's a whole kind of continuum of potential work that can exist between volunteer work where you're not paid at all and then, a minimum wage job or something like that. Like there's so many possibilities in there that even if basic income doesn't increase the amount of employment, if basic income allows us to eliminate a minimum wage or something like that, it opens up the possibility that people can work at those kinds of jobs. And I think that's a good thing. I don't know that they would have seen that in a 2-year experiment, that they would have seen people taking those jobs. But it's an interesting point. Finland's Minister of Health and Social Affairs, Pirkko Mattila, said the impact on employment of the monthly paycheck of €560, $635, seems to have been minor on the grounds of the first trial year. So yeah, he's basically saying that they didn't really see that much of an effect. And I guess even though the Finland experiment has ended, and it was 2 years long, they really only have the results from the first year so far, or they've really only started processing those. But the participants in the trial were happier and healthier than the control group. I mean, I think that's great. I mean, we shouldn't forget, what we want from the economy and what we want from our society, which is for people to be as happy and healthy and prosperous as possible. And that's, like this is not something that should be ignored. If that's the only thing that basic income does is it helps everyone be happier, then that's a win. That's a good thing. So let's see. Anyone has any comments here? People are Oasis is from Ready Player One. Okay, I haven't seen that or read that. Although people keep recommending it to me.
There's supposed to be another movie about that, so I only watch things until when they're completed, or when it's supposed to go on for years and years, and it's already gone for like 20 years, and it's already gone through like 10 years. I only go up to like the. Okay.
So that's interesting. So have you not seen any of the Marvel movies?
No. And I haven't seen any Star Wars things, but I might consider doing that because it's supposed to go on for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. David Marcos. Yeah, so this is a great chat, by the way. Thanks everyone for participating on the live stream. This has been fantastic so far. They're talking about recommending books and stuff like that. Oh, by the way, if you're watching this video sometime in the future and you're watching it in an embedded player, definitely check out the live chat, because they're talking about lots of stuff in here that we're not necessarily getting to in person. So back to the article. The basic income recipients of the test group reported better well-being in every way compared to the comparison group. Chief researcher Ollie Kangas said, great. Chief economist for the trial, Otto, some of these names are going to be hard to pronounce. Otto Kanianen, yeah. or Kanianen, said the low impact on employment was not a surprise, given that many jobless people have few skills or struggle with difficult life situations or health concerns. So maybe some of the things that caused people not to have jobs in the first place remained true even when they were receiving the basic income. My hope would be that the freedom that basic income affords means that maybe people aren't struggling with as many things, but that might not be an immediate effect across every dimension or something like that. Economists have known for a long time that with unemployed people, financial incentives don't work quite the way some people would expect them to do. Yeah, so I mean, I think that's right. An unemployed person is not just an employed person who happens not to have a job. So certainly there might be some people out there who fit that description, but there are a lot of people, especially long-term unemployed, and as a consequence of being unemployed long-term, they're in a very different very different mindset in their lives, very different psychological state compared to the people who are still working. So I think that's an important point. It's not like everybody out in the world is exactly the same, and it's just a matter of
And there's also there's a study that says that people who are unemployed are actually better off than someone in a really abusive job. And a basic income can provide a means to avoid the abusive job in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's right. Basic income gives people a lot of freedom. So if you're financially dependent, not just on a job, but maybe on a relationship or something like that,
your benefits are tied to having that job in the first place, like your health insurance or whatever, like in the U.S.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point, which is that if health insurance is no longer tied to employment, that can make things a lot easier for employers too, because now you only have to worry about wages. How much do I have to pay people to get them to work? You don't have to worry about, okay, now on top of that, I have to figure out this whole health insurance plan and make all these decisions and that kind of stuff. That makes hiring people more complicated. So even though we don't want people to do unnecessary work, we certainly still want businesses to be able to hire people and make use of labor that they might need to be able to do their business, or that would benefit them.
And if people have a basic income and there's a health insurance provided for them, then they're able to make the government fear them. The changes that they want implemented, like with the whole yellow vest movement and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. I think if everybody's happy and living a pretty good life, and the government is ensuring that, which a basic income and single payer health insurance can be a big part of, then what's the point of overthrowing the government if the government's doing everything right? And I think some people worry that something like a basic income will make people complacent and not overthrow unjust systems or something like that. But is it really an unjust system if everybody's as prosperous as possible and nobody's poorer than necessary and that kind of thing? And maybe not. Maybe that's a really good system and there's a reason why you don't want to overthrow it and that kind of thing. Let's see.
But in the U.S., people are shackled to a 30-year mortgage and they need to have their health insurance, and they don't have they can't buy their food or anything like that without the money that their job would provide. Then they have to work or whatever. They can't go. Their mind is tapped for full bandwidth. Like there's a study in India where with 9 months of the year they're ridiculously poor, and so they can't make particularly good decisions. But then suddenly they get this bumper crop or whatever, and suddenly their IQ jumps 6 points or 10 points or whatever it is, and so they make much better decisions after that.
Yeah, poverty is incredibly costly to people and to the economy and to all kinds of safety and crime and health implications to poverty and all of that. And I like to say to people that having a basic income, people are worried, well, basic income is going to be really expensive, that kind of stuff. But really, having a basic income is cheaper than not having a basic income.
Like for recidivism, if you have a basic income, people are less likely to go back to prison. Which is better, $12,000 a year or $32,000 or whatever it is dollars per year, or people if they're chronically ill, they're built. For people who are homeless, they give them apartments or like these mini houses so that they're not living on the streets, because it's far cheaper to give them a house and some money than to have them be in the emergency room every few months.
Or prison. Yeah. I mean, prisons are expensive. Hospitals are expensive. There's real resources that are being used up, in order to respond to all of the challenges of poverty. And basic income, it obviously it takes money, but in terms of the real resources, those real resources can go towards people actually buying things in the economy and stuff being produced for consumers instead of resources going into the prison system, or more resources than necessary going to emergency rooms and stuff like that. Yeah. So this is the next section of the article here. It's called Psychological Boost. Sini Martinen, 36, had been unemployed for nearly a year before winning the lottery, as she described the trial. So she called getting the basic income, or being selected for the basic income, as winning the lottery. Her basic income gave her enough confidence to open up a restaurant with 2 friends. I think the effect was a lot psychological, the former IT consultant told Reuters. You kind of get this idea. You have 2 years, you have the security of 560 euros per month. It gave me the security to start my own business. That's what she said. Her income only rose by 50 euros a month compared to the jobless benefit she had been receiving. But in an instant, you lose the bureaucracy, the reporting, Martinen said. So I think that's huge. It's not just about the amount of money; it's about the way in which it's handled. So, like I was saying before, it's nice to put the bureaucracy entirely on the taxation side, because then the people who don't have to worry about taxation anyway, they don't have to deal with the bureaucracy. They can just collect their basic income, and then the government can, it's in the government's interest to figure out the taxation side and get that right, and people don't have to worry about it as much because the government's going to want its money.
And you don't have to apply for 40 jobs a week or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, all the work requirements, that kind of stuff. Are you really, being honest and like reporting how much, there's all kinds of bureaucracy there. Like if you get a job and you're getting a basic income, then maybe your taxes go up, and that's kind of calculated at the end of the year. But it's not like you have to worry about losing the benefit side of things. So yeah, I think this is a huge part of basic income. So Mira Jaskari, 36, who briefly found a job during the trial, says it tries to combat unemployment, which has been persistently high for years, but reached a 10-year low of 6.6% in December. So that followed the imposition of benefits sanctions on unemployed people who refused to work. The basic income has been controversial, however, with leaders of the main Finnish political parties keen to streamline the benefit system, but wary of offering money for nothing, especially ahead of parliamentary elections due in April. So a lot of people worry about the money for nothing issue, and I guess the question is, why do we value human beings? Is it because of something they do, or is it because they're people? And I think a lot of times in our society, we think, well, what is this person contributing? What are they doing for society? But then when you kind of follow that chain of thinking, to the end, you get to, well, what is society? Who are we trying to benefit? Like if you want people to be working, who are they working to benefit? And ultimately it comes back to the people again. So ultimately it's about how to get people the most benefit. And we really only need people working insofar as it supports that end. And if
sort
we
of
can,
like the recycling sign, it's a big circle, a virtuous cycle or a negative, vicious cycle.
yeah. Yeah.
And I'm also interested, it's in April next month, if there's a party that's wants to institute a basic income again.
Yeah, that would be interesting to follow, and it would be, I'm interested in seeing what's going to happen in Italy. So I think we'll be talking about that at some point here in this meetup. But yeah, I don't so
And the thing in Italy is a lot like what's happened in Finland, where it's only handed out to the poor.
Okay, yeah.
It's a basic income in name only.
Yeah, so that's problematic, but it's also it's also going to go. It's not just going to be like a trial of 2,000 people or something, right?
Yeah,
So it's still interesting to look at, and we can talk about all these different things in a basic income discussion, even things that aren't exactly a basic income, like yeah, it'll be interesting to talk about. One of the things I like the most about these various experiments is that it really brings the topic of basic income up to consciousness in the public. When something like Finland happens, then people are like, oh, what's that? Finland's going to try giving free money to people. Or when, there's a presidential candidate like Andrew Yang who's like, I want to give everybody, he doesn't call it free money, but obviously basic income is free money. Everybody knows that. If you don't want to call that, that's just spin or marketing or something like that.
Freedom dividend.
Yeah, the freedom, it even has the word free in it. But yeah, he calls it the freedom dividend. But the fact that he wants to do that, even if he doesn't become president, like, that brings it into consciousness for people, and I really like that, and I like that about these experiments too. Even though I don't know that we can really learn anything scientific from them. So let me check here on the live stream. Okay, Alex has given us some good links, or a good link to some discussion of basic income from different perspectives, both for and against. So you guys can check that out in the chat. And Jacqueline is talking about her past as a human trafficking survivor, which I'm sorry that happened to you, Jacqueline. That's awful. And it was long before there was much of an anti-trafficking movement. She was unable to get any job throughout her life, and now she's blind and can't get a job. So yeah, I mean, this is awful. And in a world with basic income, certainly you can't. If they're victims of human trafficking and they're not citizens, and the government doesn't know that they're there, it's going to be really hard to provide them with a basic income. So there are still, like I said, there are problems that basic income doesn't solve. But ideally, in my ideal world, basic income would go to everyone, not just citizens. But there's still the challenge of ensuring that we find everyone and we can get everyone the money. And then there's other problems that basic income doesn't solve. Like if you're blind and disabled, for example, you might need some kinds of support that you can't just get by having the same amount of money that everyone else has. So it's important that we recognize that people have unique needs that might need to be addressed, and basic income is not that. Certainly because it's money, you can spend it on whatever you want, and people have different things that they want to buy. So it is kind of uniquely tailored in that way, in the sense of the markets are providing people with what they individually want. But there's a limit to how far that can go if people have very, very different circumstances.
And a large percentage of India's population has biometric cards now because of a program within the last 10 years that they instituted.
Biometric cards?
Mm-hmm.
Like cards that have fingerprints built into them or something like that?
I don't really understand how they what they mean by biometrics, though.
Okay. That's interesting. I'll have to look into that. So Jacqueline points out that most human trafficking victims are U.S. citizens, or presumably in the United States, most human trafficking victims here are United States citizens like her. But when you're stigmatized and criminalized as a sex offender for being a victim of forced prostitution, you still don't get jobs or help with anything. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a really good point. And this is, this is true for anyone who's been involved in the criminal justice system or anything like that. It becomes really hard to get a job. And if we really lived in an economy where we needed everyone to work, there'd be jobs for everyone. Businesses would say, okay, maybe you were a sex offender, or maybe you have a criminal record or something like that, but we need the job done, so we'll hire you. But that's not the world we live in. The world we live in is, businesses don't really have to hire people. Like if if you don't have a college degree, we don't have to hire you. If your mugshot comes up on a Google search, we might as well just not hire that person because we don't want to risk it or something like that. And this is a problem in a society where people depend on jobs for their livelihood. So I really hope we can move beyond that and really allow people to kind of partake in the economy and benefit from the economy without it being tied to labor. So here we go. We're getting to the last part of the article here, which is titled Tax Bind. So I don't know how to pronounce this either. Prime Minister Juha Sipilä. I hope that's how you pronounce it. That's how you would pronounce it in English. Her center party, or his, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, has proposed limiting the basic income to poor people with sanctions if they reject a job offer. Well, Conservative Finance Minister Petteri Orpo says he favors a scheme like Britain's Universal Credit.
Yeah, but Universal Credit has all these issues. Like, people are actually forced into sex work because they don't get their their benefits for 5 months or more.
So there you go. I mean, this brings up the question, like, if you really want to limit basic income to poor people, then don't do it on the basic income side of things. Do it on the tax side of things. Increase the taxes for people who aren't poor. That way you're getting the same benefit in the end, but then it's not on the backs of poor people to try to navigate the system. Limit, and then he wants sanctions if they reject a job offer. So this is just why do we want to force people to work? The labor market is a market, and if it needs people to work, then it will
incentivize them to do so.
Yeah, it will pay them to work. If you need people to work, you can pay them. You don't need to punish. You don't need the government coming in and punishing people for not working. That's just not efficient. So I think that of course plays into the whole work ethic thing. Thinking of jobs as kind of fundamental to the economy, and I think that would be a problem if they tried to do this. There would be people who can't, being able to reject a job offer, being able to say like, hey, this job is not good for me. That's a really important thing. People need to be able to say no. You're taking away people's freedom, and it's not efficient. It's not efficient for the economy. If you want people working, you want the people who would say yes. You don't want the people who are going to say yes just because they get punished if they say no. You want people who actually want to do the job. And maybe they're taking wages that are lower than what's efficient for the economy, that kind of thing. You're distorting the labor market. And if we want the markets to be efficient, then we got to ease up on some of these regulations and restrictions when it comes to poor people or anyone kind of receiving benefits from the government. We want to be kind of as simple and as efficient as possible. So that the economy can do its thing, can do what it does, and that people aren't kind of left behind due to technicalities and stuff like that. You're adding more technicalities here, and maybe I wouldn't be as frustrated about this, except that I completely disagree with the idea that we should punish people for not having jobs. The higher tax. So we're let's see what people say here. Yeah. Okay. So back to the article, the higher taxes that the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, says would be needed to pay for a basic income schemes might also be off-putting for voters. So the thing is, what matters is the net, right? The net benefit and the net cost to people. So you can have a targeted program that only goes to poor people, or you can have a program that goes to everyone, and then you increase taxes on the richer people to cancel it out. So in the end, you're still getting the same net amount of money to poor people, but people look at the one with the higher taxes, even though it's equivalent. They look at the one with the higher taxes and they're worried about the higher taxes. But really, what it is you use your basic income to pay the higher taxes, and that's what the higher taxes are for. You can cancel that out to the extent that you want to cancel it out, and it's just a matter of shifting the responsibility from the benefit side to the taxation side, and keeping the benefit side simple. In a review of the Finnish scheme last year, the OECD warned that implementing it nationally and cost neutrally for the state would imply significant income redistribution, especially towards couples from single people, and increased poverty. So that's interesting. I don't imagine how a basic income could increase poverty. I'll have to look at if that review is published somewhere or something like that. That doesn't really make sense to me. Toward couples from single people, I guess that's because both people in a marriage would get the basic income.
No, actually, in Canada, a singular person in a basic income was 17,000, and a couple was 24,000. So it's like less than 50% more.
Wow! But in the Finnish scheme, was it just going to individuals, or was it similar to Canada?
Only like one person in a family would qualify, because it's only 2,000 people. So in Finland.
Oh, but I was imagining they're talking about if they scaled it up to the whole country here.
It would probably be if it was 560 euros. It would probably be like one person would get a couple would get 1,000 instead of 1,120 or 900 or something like that instead of 1,120.
Yeah, we'll have to look up what the plan was. I guess by default, I was assuming it would go to everyone, including both people and a couple. Now, certainly, if you want to change that, you can make it so that it wouldn't cause couples to benefit more than single people would. But again, you're kind of tweaking this thing.
Couples don't benefit more in the programs that the government set up because, well, I don't know, but they should get the same amount as individuals, but they don't because how do I say they. Like apartments and things like that. You only need so much for an apartment, but if you have two people getting a month, then getting the basic income, then they don't. I don't know how to explain it.
If you have two people getting a basic income, then and they're living in the same place, then they save more money than one person getting a basic income. Yeah, I think that's right. And that's if everybody gets the same basic income, which is kind of what you would want anyway. So let's see. The researchers have acknowledged that the Finnish pilot was less than realistic because it did not include any tax clawbacks once participants found work and reached a certain income level. Well, that's not the only reason it was less than realistic. And certainly if it had included the tax clawback, that wouldn't have made all that much of a difference at a trial of this scale. But certainly at least they're talking about the tax clawback. Because you can like I was saying, you can make the basic income, plus a tax clawback completely equivalent to a targeted program, except with all the complicated administration done on the taxation side. So it's good that they're bringing that up. Swiss voters rejected a similar scheme in 2016. Italy is due to introduce a citizen's wage in April in a major overhaul of the welfare state, which will offer income to support to the unemployed and poor. Had allowed him to concentrate on writing instead of form filling or attending job seekers courses. So I mean, that's important, right? I mean, like if people are spending their time, like fulfilling requirements and filling out forms and taking job seekers courses and like doing all the stuff that they're kind of supposed to do, they're not living their lives. And basic income allows people to live their lives. And again, it's like, we really need to ask ourselves as a society, why do we want people to get jobs, and does it serve the greater good of society for us to have this mindset of everybody should have a job and we're better off when everyone has a job? Because I don't think it's true. He said the end of the 2-year trial, during which he published 2 books, had made it difficult again for him to accept commissions because, he says, I can earn only 300 euros per month without losing any benefits. If people are paid money freely, and that makes them creative, productive, and welfare brings welfare.
J.K. Rowling was on the Dole, as it's called in England, while she was writing the first Harry Potter novel, and Harper, whatever her name is,
Harper
Lee, yes, she had an equivalent of basic income from a friend when she was writing To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah, and just imagine that all the people who can't navigate the system and get these kind of benefits, or who don't have a friend that can support them, or a family that can support them, how many Harry Potters and To Kill a Mockingbirds were just never created because people didn't have the resources and the freedom to create them. And I don't know the answer to that, but I'm excited to find out what the future is going to bring. So here's the end of the article. This is Tuomas Muraja again. He says, if you feel free, you feel safer, and then you can do whatever you want. That is my assessment. Yeah, and I mean, that makes sense. People should do whatever they want, and if we need them to work, then we pay them, and then what they want is to work because they're getting paid for it, and that's fine. I think that yeah. So that was the end of the article, and I don't know if we can really learn anything from the Finland experiment or any of these other kind of localized basic income experiments, because they basically just show that people are better off when you give them money, and we already know that. And the effects of basic income are on the overall economy.
And we might never learn anything from the canceled Ottawa experiment because, Ontario experiment, because there's not going to be any funding for the studies to follow.
Yeah. So we're getting to the end here. If anyone on the live stream has anything to add to the discussion, if it's about Finland or anything else we've talked about, feel free to chime in. Richard, do you have any final thoughts on Finland or anything we talked about tonight?
Can't really think of anything.
Okay. So yeah. Jacqueline is sharing her Patreon link on the live stream, which is her only source of income. So you can check that out in the chat. And yeah, I think, I liked the discussion tonight. I liked that we talked about a lot of the fundamentals of basic income because that's what's really exciting to me. And, the context of the the Finland basic income trial and the discussion of that really provided an opportunity to get at fundamentally what basic income is and what it's for. And like my mom was saying, she likes that the various experiments raise consciousness, and I think that's an important thing too.
Yeah, you're also able to air grievances about how basic income might be implemented or how funded or whatever in this chat.
Yeah. So Alex Lancaster says our conversation gets a bit wonky and abstract, which is well and good and has its place, but lived experience is important. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think something that's interesting about basic income is that it's not really about lived experience. It's about, okay, how do you get the markets to work efficiently? And then people's lived experience is obviously important for well-being, but it's not, basic income is this really, really simple thing that solves a really, really simple problem. How do you get money into the hands of consumers? And I think once you've solved that problem, it actually gives us more freedom to focus on people's individual situations, their lived experience, and yeah, it's just more opportunity to solve other problems once you've solved this kind of fundamental problem with the economy. So I'm excited to find out what other problems we're going to be able to address once we've kind of simplified the markets through basic income. So Jacqueline says, I write about the lived experience of poverty, generational poverty, human trafficking, marginalization, and lots of economic justice stuff, including stuff that middle-class people should know, like how there are predators preying on those with lures of becoming rich as a trader, starting with only $1,000, and what trading really entails. Okay, so that sounds like really cool, interesting stuff. My hope is that with basic income in place, people will be less vulnerable to those kinds of scams. And then also, on the flip side of it, if we live in a more prosperous economy, people might be, like the question is why are these predators out there? Why are they scamming people in this way? And my sense is that they wouldn't be doing it, or they wouldn't be doing it as much if they felt secure in their own lives, if they felt like they were living a really good life and had the freedom to not worry too much about survival or how to get the things they wanted and need and stuff like that. So I think basic income would help on both sides of that, I hope. So let's see. Yeah, so that's it. We're a few minutes early on wrapping it up, but I think that's fine. It's been a really, really great discussion. Thanks everyone on the live stream. You guys really, your comments were super, super interesting and useful for the discussion. Next week we're talking about we're going even more wonky. We're talking about the Treasury and the Fed and how monetary policy and fiscal policy is managed in the United States, and how that relates to basic income, and how that relates to what's possible in terms of implementing a basic income. I like to tell people that you can't understand basic income if you don't understand money. So next week is all about the institutions that manage the money in our United States economy. So that's it. Thanks, everyone.